Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome back to Books Are the Basis. These are conversations with different ISKCON senior devotees and leaders in our movement, talking about the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And we're very grateful to have today with us His Grace Vamsivadan Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Vamsivadana Prabhu is a devotee who has very deeply been absorbed in reading and studying Srila Prabhupada's books, also teaching as his main service. He's a teacher of Bhakti Shastri. Vamsivadan studied medicine and surgery at the university in Pune and received a master in that. He's also a doctor by profession, and then came in touch with the devotees in 1996, and then 3 years later, in 1999, joined as a full-time brahmachari in Pune, and from there on started to serve in the youth college preaching and different other preaching departments, and has been just continuing studying and teaching Srila Prabhupada's books very intensely. Today, Prabhu is a Bhakti Shastri teacher, Bhakti Vaibhav teacher, Bhaktivedanta teacher as well, teacher training courses, disciple courses. He teaches at the Mayapur Institute, at the Vrindavan Institute for Higher Education, and he is also the member of the board of ISKCON Examination. And so wonderful to have you with us. I had the pleasure also to study under your guidance, actually, in my Bhakti Vaibhav study. So it's my pleasure to have one of my teachers here in this session. Let's start with, we heard you basically went into a career in the medical field, and then all of a sudden your path went in a different direction. You became a monk, a brahmachari. How did that happen, and what did Prabhupada's books play a role in that? What was the first book that you received? Maybe you can tell us about that.
Okay, so thank you for that. And so before I begin, I would just like to offer short prayers.
Sure.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminati Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Krishna. So on that question as to what was the turning point, and I think so that's something which is common for all of us as devotees of ISKCON. The turning point is usually the causeless mercy of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, in the form of his books. And so the first book that I received was Bhagavad Gita as It Is by Srila Prabhupada. And we read that book and got quite interested. I remember Srila Prabhupada's books actually focus on the essence so precisely and repeatedly. And so therefore, as we know, Srila Prabhupada, he keeps repeating in so many of his purports the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Whether it's a part of the verse or not, but Srila Prabhupada does it so often. And so after reading the Bhagavad Gita, I was to appear for the final exams of my medical course, and before the exams, I was chanting the Mahamantra, hoping to get good grades in the exam. So that was how it started. And then So we saw the address of the temple in the Bhagavad Gita list of centers, and then we started coming to the ISKCONs, and then that's how it started. So it's all by the causeless mercy of Srila Prabhupada that we came in touch with devotees, and that's how we continued. And so therefore, very grateful to Srila Prabhupada for his wonderful books, and so trying to serve in that way.
Like you're coming from an Indian background, like people like myself, when we get in touch with Bhagavad Gita, it's completely something foreign. I'm sure you must have known Bhagavad Gita before meeting Prabhupada's Gita. How was Prabhupada's Gita different from maybe the Gitas that you have read before? And we'd like to say something about Prabhupada's specific contribution?
Frankly speaking, I never read any edition of the Gita before. And maybe actually that was a saving grace. I was not swayed away or deviated by so many other editions of the Gita and their interpretations and all that. And so, practically speaking, the first Gita I read was Srila Prabhupada's Gita. Yeah. And so, maybe in one sense that was beneficial, because then it is like everything is new and it becomes more easy to accept.
Okay, yeah. You also highlighted how Prabhupada emphasizes so much the essence in a very on every page. Right. That's something that many speakers have shared in these conversations. That there's a certain intensity or certain, like, you feel that Prabhupada had a certain, it was certain emergency or a certain, Prabhupada had really something to say. He had a message that he wanted to share with the world. So you also felt that when you read.
Yes. Yeah. That's true.
Okay, and anything specifically remembered from these first Gita studies? You said that you searched for the address and went to the temple. Any other memories on how Prabhupada's preaching convinced you? I mean, because you were on a, as I said before, you studied medicine and you could have made a big career, but you changed that.
Right. So besides the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, there were some other teachings of Srila Prabhupada which really became so relevant at that point of time. So Srila Prabhupada, in so many of his books and lectures, he mentions that how much ever one earns, at the end of the day, ultimately the person is going to eat 4 chapatis. So at that point of time in medical studies, and after that medical practice in those days was very intense. So there was a lot of work to do in the hospital, literally working like an ass. So after I read the Bhagavad Gita and other books of Srila Prabhupada, then this was the point that really hit me. And that is, why am I working so hard? Why am I working so hard? At the end of the day, yes, it's just 4 chapatis or a little bit of eating and a small place to sleep. So just for these basic necessities of life, what is the need to work so hard? And even if one works so hard, earns a lot of wealth, earns a lot of name and fame and reputation as a doctor, but what's the use? Because everything is going to be finished at the end of life. Death is going to snatch away everything. And as far as death is concerned, whoever one may be, even the best of doctors, death is 100% sure as death. Mrityu sarva haraschaham. So these were the teachings of Srila Prabhupada, which really struck me. And I really began to think, why am I working so hard? What for? And even if I work so hard, as far as the earning is concerned, that ultimately depends on one's karma. So one could be the best of doctors, but still, how much wealth one gets, how much happiness one is going to get, is ultimately going to be dependent on one's karma. So, therefore, these were the teachings which were really very relevant at that point of time. And so then I thought, why this hard struggle for existence just for some basic material necessities? So I thought, let's do something better.
Nice, thank you for sharing. Yeah, and indeed, you have been dedicated your life to studying Srila Prabhupada's books. So it's so wonderful. So now, as a teacher of Bhakti Shastri, what would you tell our listeners, viewers? Why is it so important to read daily in Srila Prabhupada's books, just in general?
One of the first and foremost important points, as far as I think so, is taking into consideration the efforts and the endeavors Srila Prabhupada has put into giving us these books. As we all know that Srila Prabhupada, every day practically, wherever he was on the globe, would rise early in the morning when practically the entire world would be sleeping. Srila Prabhupada took the trouble to give us these books out of his immense compassion for humanity. Srila Prabhupada took this endeavor at that age. And so towards the later part of his life, I heard, in fact, from His Grace Harishwari Prabhu, that sometime in 1976, when Harishwari Prabhu was about to set up Srila Prabhupada's bed at night, Srila Prabhupada said, no need. And so for several months, Srila Prabhupada didn't sleep at all. And that's how actually Srila Prabhupada was able to translate so much, give his purpose to such a vast part of the Bhagavatam in such a short time, along with the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So what an immense endeavor Srila Prabhupada put to give us these books. So at least as a matter of gratitude to what Srila Prabhupada has given us, I feel it's our duty to reciprocate by studying Srila Prabhupada's books very deeply and scrutinizingly, as he himself wanted us to do. So Srila Prabhupada very often said that, I have not given these books simply for distribution, but I've given for the devotees to read. And so in so many of his purports, Srila Prabhupada has, in his purports, in his letters, in his lectures, in his conversations, Srila Prabhupada has emphasized the need to read his books. And so therefore, unless we read Srila Prabhupada's books, it would be very difficult for us to understand Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission. And if we don't understand his mood and mission, if we don't understand what he expects of us, then very likely we'll be speculating and go in the wrong direction. And so therefore, one quote of Srila Prabhupada, which very prominently comes to mind, is from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I don't remember the exact reference, but it's quite an often quoted sentence of Srila Prabhupada from that purport where he says, all of my devotees or all of the devotees within the Krishna consciousness movement must read all of the books that have been translated. So very significantly in that sentence, Srila Prabhupada says, all the devotees and all the books that have been translated.
Mm.
And then he continues on to say, but if they don't do that, then they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down.
Mm.
And they will miss the golden opportunity in human life to achieve self-realization. And so therefore, to save ourselves from repeated material existence and to achieve the ultimate goal of human life, reading Srila Prabhupada's books is so important because Srila Prabhupada has given us that instruction as the founder Acharya. And so therefore, how important it is for us to follow that instruction that Srila Prabhupada has given us in order to attract his mercy and make spiritual advancement. Yasya prasada, bhagavad prasada. And also Srila Prabhupada has, in many of his letters to his senior disciples, has written that if you don't read all the books, then how will the younger devotees be inspired? So if the senior devotees themselves don't read the books, how will the younger ones be inspired to do so? So it becomes a great responsibility on the part of senior devotees, leaders, to set that example within the society. And also another point Srila Prabhupada would often say is that if we want to be effective preachers, then understanding the philosophy very scrutinizingly is very important in order so that we can present the philosophy properly to others. So for all these different reasons, of course, there are many more reasons, but some important reasons. These reasons, I think it's a great responsibility on our part, actually, to read Srila Prabhupada's books.
Yeah, you started with gratitude, and also that some our speakers have spoken or highlighted this, that if you just reflect and meditate about what Prabhupada went through to give us these books, it's just a natural, if you have a natural response that you want to express your gratitude by reading it, reading these books. You mentioned about mood and mission, which is one of the aims of study. We have in the systematic study, Bhakti Shastri and Bhakti Vaibhava courses, we have this different study aims, and one of them is understanding the mood and mission of Srila Prabhupada. You highlighted that point. Could you explain to us a little bit more what do we understand with mood and mission, and like when we read, could you give an example? What does it mean to understand Prabhupada's mood and mission by reading his books?
Right. So understanding the mood and mission of the founder Acharya is something which is very vital for every member within the society to imbibe, because by showing that loyalty and fidelity to the founder Acharya, the Supreme Lord actually is very pleased, and we can attract his mercy to make spiritual advancement, as Krishna himself says in the Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto, Acharya Mam Vijaniya. So the Acharya is non-different from myself. So therefore, understanding the mood and mission of the founder Acharya is something which is very important. So what is meant by mood and mission? So we find that Srila Prabhupada, as the founder Acharya and one of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas within the Parampara, had a specific mood and mission. One of the very prominent mood and mission that comes out in all of Srila Prabhupada's writings and lectures is his compassion and his preaching spirit. And we find that again and again. And therefore, we see that preaching spirit which Srila Prabhupada himself had, it comes out so powerfully that we have examples, we have cases of devotees who practically, even without coming in association with devotees, begin to preach. Because that mood of compassion and the preaching spirit is so strong in Srila Prabhupada. And something which is very, very unique amongst the Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas. And so we find that wherever Srila Prabhupada gets an opportunity to insert that preaching spirit in any of his purports, Srila Prabhupada does that. It just reminds me of one specific incident or one specific verse of the Bhagavad Gita. So in the description of the universal form in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, so it is mentioned how this universal form was, he had kirita, he had helmets, he had garlands, he had ornaments, he was beautifully decorated and dressed. So there's a description mentioned. Now, if we hear the recordings of Srila Prabhupada's morning walk conversations, Srila Prabhupada on his morning walks on the Juhu beach at a certain point of time was having one of the devotees read this 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And as you may be aware, that on these morning walks at Juhu, there was Dr. Patel, who was a sort of impersonalist. And so when the devotee reads this verse and translation, so Srila Prabhupada says, just see, the universal form is well dressed, has ornaments and garlands. That means there is a form. Otherwise, how can there be garlands and ornaments without a form? Where will you put them? You'll put them in the sky? Where will you put them? So immediately Srila Prabhupada took that chance to refute Mayavads. And so that's Prabhupada's preaching spirit. And like that, there are so many examples. The slightest chance, Srila Prabhupada would insert some preaching application points within his talks, within his purports. And so that's something which very much stands out as Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission, very uniquely, even amongst the Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas. So, and mood also includes, we find Srila Prabhupada's amongst his many, many qualities. We also see Srila Prabhupada's deep gratitude and deep humility, which also comes out both in his purports and lectures. Again, many, many instances, but again, I would like to cite one. Right in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we see that on Arjuna's flag, there is a symbol of Hanuman, Kapidvaja. And Srila Prabhupada is giving a lecture on that verse. I suppose it's in London. And Srila Prabhupada says, just see, Arjuna wants the blessings of the previous warrior Acharya, Hanumanji, Vajrangaji. So this is the mood of a Vaishnav. A Vaishnav always considers himself helpless and therefore is always dependent on the mercy of the previous Acharyas. So that was always Srila Prabhupada's mood, the mood of dependence on the previous Acharyas and that gratitude towards the previous Acharyas. So that's also a significant mood which is there. And I would also like to emphasize one important aspect of Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission, which also comes out very frequently, and that is Srila Prabhupada's emphasis on hearing and chanting. Srila Prabhupada's faith in the holy name, Srila Prabhupada's emphasis on Shravanam and Kirtan. There's one purport in the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam where Srila Prabhupada writes that we have created all these ISKCON centers specifically so that the devotees engage in Shravanam, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting, and thereby give an opportunity to everyone else who comes to these centers to also engage in Shravanam, Kirtanam. So these are aspects of Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission, which come out very significantly in all his purports. And therefore, when we read these purports, we study these purports, then we can also understand Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission and imbibe that same mood and mission within our own lives. And by following that, then we please Srila Prabhupada, and that's how we can attract his mercy. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you for citing these examples. I think it has become very clear. You gave the example of compassion, humility, dependence, and also faith in the holy name. And these are qualities that we can, when we read, because when we read the books, of course, we associate with the author. And also we have this statement, Prabhupada said that he will always live in his books. So would you say that this is the way to basically, by understanding his purports, then absorbing his mood and his understanding, in this way we actually associate with Prabhupada, getting to know Prabhupada closer in this way, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What would you say is the proper attitude to read Prabhupada's books in order to actually meet Prabhupada in his books, to access Prabhupada? What would be the proper attitude as a student?
Right. So in my understanding, the proper attitude for reading Srila Prabhupada's books is an attitude of gratitude. So if we have that attitude of gratitude, just grateful to what Srila Prabhupada has given us. And our main purpose of studying these books is simply to reciprocate with what Srila Prabhupada has given us. In fact, once when Srila Prabhupada was asked this question, that how can we repay you for what you have given us? Srila Prabhupada said, you simply receive what I have given as it is and distribute it to others. And so therefore, that's, in my understanding, that's one of the main reasons why we're studying Srila Prabhupada's books. Our motive need not be simply to become great scholars or great speakers or orators, or simply want to show off our knowledge to others. Those all are secondary. If it happens, well and good. But the main attitude, the main motive to read the books is simply to express our gratitude and please Srila Prabhupada by studying his books, because that is what he wanted. And I do have a firm belief and understanding that by pleasing Srila Prabhupada, who's our founder Acharya, then that's the perfection in our spiritual life. And so therefore I feel that's what needs to be the right attitude.
Thank you. Like in a service attitude, we also
right, exactly.
We say also when we chant the holy name, also it's a way to serve the Lord. Yeah, so in that mood. I'm still going back to you made some statements about why reading is important, and you made so many valuable points. I'd just like to address another one. You quoted this purport Prabhupada makes in a Chaitanya Charitamrita about all the books should be read by all the devotees, and otherwise they simply eat, sleep, and fall down. I think that's also an important aspect, that reading Prabhupada's books is kind of giving us spiritual nourishment, isn't it?
Right.
Would you like to say something about that? Like in my life, if my mind starts to have strange thoughts, then I ask, oops, I didn't read. So usually that there is a connection between that, right? Do you like to elaborate on that a little bit? How the books give us strength? Or how we sharpen our intelligence? That's another thing. Or it's said that reading sharpens intelligence.
Right. Yes. Being in the material world, where the material energy, Maya, is so powerful, and Maya has so many ways and so many plans to allure us from our goal. And usually, Maya acts on the mind. And as Arjuna has stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati balava dhridam tasyaham nigraham manye vayureva sadushkaram. So the mind is more difficult to control than even the raging winds. So who can control the winds? And the mind is more powerful than the winds. And not just ordinary winds, raging winds, like a cyclone or a typhoon. Just imagine the power of the mind. Arjuna is really giving a very graphic example to illustrate the power of the mind. And so therefore, as one is practicing spiritual life, and I'm sure all of us have this experience at some point or the other, as Prabhupada writes in his purports, that it's a war against Maya, it's a battle against Maya. Practically at every moment, the battle is there. And so therefore, if one wants to be successful in fighting this battle, one of the aspects definitely is to sharpen the intelligence. Because in the famous analogy of the human body being compared to a chariot and the 5 horses being compared to the senses and the reins to the mind, and the driver of the chariots is the intelligence. So if the driver is not very strong, then the 5 horses are just going to go haywire here and there, and the chariot of the body is just going to topple. So in order for the horses, the senses, and the mind to be under control, the intelligence definitely needs to be sharpened, needs to be strengthened. And so therefore, especially in the present age of Kali Yuga, where there are so many distractions, I think so it becomes all the more essential for us to sharpen our intelligence by taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada's books. And as Srila Prabhupada himself said it, I didn't write these books. Krishna wrote them. And so if we take that example of the power of the mind being compared to the raging winds, ultimately, who can control the raging wind? Only Krishna can control. And Srila Prabhupada's Bhaktivedanta purports are in one sense given by Krishna himself. And therefore, by taking shelter of these purports, I think we attract Krishna's mercy, who can help us control the raging wind of our minds. And therefore, again, we hear from many devotees that when on any particular day, when they don't read Srila Prabhupada's books, then it becomes so difficult to perform various services in the right consciousness, the right attitudes, because then the mind just takes over, and then one gets bewildered and lands up in confusion. Just 2 days back, His Grace Vijay Prabhu, the book distribution minister, he gave a Bhagavatam class here in Vrindavan. And the point which struck me so much was, he said, 95% of good book distribution depends on one's consciousness. And that consciousness can only be cultivated by attentively chanting the holy names and reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And so therefore, and I think so that applies to any service that one does. If one wants to do that service effectively in the right consciousness, then reading Srila Prabhupada's books regularly becomes so important, so that we tune in to that spiritual consciousness, to the Krishna consciousness. And only when we have that Krishna consciousness that we can do any service with the singular aim and motive to please Guru and Krishna. And when we do that service in the right consciousness, that will actually attract the mercy of Guru and Krishna, by which we make spiritual progress. Hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, yes, sure. If we imagine that actually everyone would read, like all the devotees in ISKCON would read every day an hour in Prabhupada's books, how would that change our movement? What do you think would be the effect of that?
The spiritual world would descend into the material world. It would just Vrindavan, because then everyone would be in Vrindavan consciousness. And so Vrindavan would manifest right in the material world. And if that would happen, we can just imagine how powerful the preaching would be if everyone is in just that Vrindavan consciousness. And of course, we do understand that ISKCON that way is definitely the spiritual embassy, the embassy to the spiritual world. And so if everyone would regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books, not just read, as Srila Prabhupada in many of his purports, letters would actually use the word study,
right.
Sometimes scrutinizingly study, because acquiring knowledge is not just about reading or hearing. In one of the Upanishads, there are these 3 stages of acquiring knowledge. I'm sure many of the devotees must have heard this. So there's Shravanam, then there's Mananam, and then there's Nididhyasanam. Then the acquisition of knowledge becomes actually complete. So if we actually study scrutinizingly, then we will actually be inspired to contemplate, discuss with other devotees on what Srila Prabhupada has actually given in his books. And then it will be possible for one to actually apply that knowledge within one's own life. And that will actually lead to realization with the mercy of Guru and Krishna. And so therefore, if all devotees would actually be doing that regularly, we can just imagine how all the devotees would be in such a wonderful spiritual consciousness, and everyone would be just serving with the aim to please Guru and Krishna. Then so many of the problems and hassles and challenges within the moment would vanish into thin air. And then the moment would be so attractive, because everyone would be so blissful in Krishna consciousness, just like Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates. And then maybe just like how Mahaprabhu's preaching Mahaprabhu would just glance at someone and fully invest him with pure Krishna prem. And he would just go to his village and he would just glance at others. And so maybe we could expect something like that.
Wow, that's a wonderful vision.
But in any case, the point is, it would be such a wonderful atmosphere.
It would have a great impact, yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful. So we spoke about the importance. I think you powerfully gave a lot of good reasons why it's important to read. Let's talk a little bit about the reading practice, how to read. In a sense, you also emphasized how leaders should read, how it's important, an example. But often, especially leaders, they're so busy, so many meetings and so much service. Then sometimes we hear they say we don't have time to read. It's not really practical. So what would you advise devotees how to make sure that we find time, how to make sure to overcome other obstacles such as, I don't know, having lack of taste or being tired, or what, any advice you can give us to improve our reading?
So regarding lack of time, I think so. Everything is based on priorities. Just like we prioritize. Otherwise, everyone has so many things to do within 24 hours. But most of how we do things is based on prioritization. And just like we prioritize chanting the holy names, we prioritize attending the Srimad Bhagavatam class, we prioritize honoring Krishna Prasadam, because we understand these things are something which are very vital for our material and spiritual sustenance. And so I think similarly, the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books also needs to be prioritized. And if we have the priority, then we will make time for it. And so therefore, I think so the regularity is something which is very important. So as I think so, Vaisheshika Prabhu, he talks about that reading a page, what's that? Day by day?
Being a sage, page by page?
Right, yes.
Something like this.
So, yes. So I think so that sort of regularity, even if it's reading a page every day, would help. And so it may not be a great quantity of reading, but I think so the regularity of reading would be more helpful. And so if one takes that priority and manages to read, of course, Srila Prabhupada, in many of his letters and conversations, has said one should read at least 1 or 2 hours every day. But if one is very busy, doesn't have that much of time, then I think so at least 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour of reading regularly would definitely be helpful. And every day one is covering a certain portion, then that will help in the long run. The second point regarding the taste for reading, hearing. In that connection, there is a very beautiful purport that Srila Prabhupada gives. This is 4th canto, 30th chapter, verse number 20. A very beautiful purport where Srila Prabhupada explains that how one can actually get a taste for reading. Who gives the taste? Because sometimes devotees also tend to say that Srila Prabhupada's books, purports seem to be sort of monotonous. He keeps repeating the same things again and again and things like that. In this purport, Srila Prabhupada writes that Krishna, as the super soul within the heart, gives inspiration. But to whom does he give inspiration? He gives inspiration to one who is sincere and serious in his devotional practices. So when one is sincere in his devotional practices, then Krishna manifests as ever new, ever fresh. Because that's what the Brahma Samhita says. Krishna is always Nava Yovanam. He's always ever youthful, ever fresh. So therefore, when one is sincerely trying to read Srila Prabhupada's books to please Guru and Krishna, to please Srila Prabhupada, then even though one may be reading the same thing over and over again, it never appears to be the same. It never appears to be hackneyed and boring, but it will appear to be ever new, ever fresh, because Krishna, being pleased with the devotee's sincerity, will invest within his heart so many newer and newer realizations, even though one may be reading the same subject matter. And that's how, by sincerely trying to please Srila Prabhupada, to please Guru and Krishna, and by sincerely making those endeavors in one's devotional service, then Krishna reciprocates with the devotee's sincerity and gives that higher taste, gives those newer and newer realizations by which the subject matter will always remain ever fresh. So these are my few thoughts.
Do you have any specific, I don't know, methods how you prepare for lectures, or any technique you would like to share with the devotees?
In my humble opinion, the standard of giving lectures, presentations, needs to be in accordance to what Srila Prabhupada has shown us. So therefore, if we regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books and hear Srila Prabhupada's lectures, then that will set the standards as to how the class needs to be given. I think so. One of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, I think so, it's Purna Prajna Prabhu, I'm not very sure, but one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples wrote an article on Dandavats I read about giving classes. And the significant point that he mentions is that in a class, one should present Srila Prabhupada and not oneself. That means one just becomes a transparent via medium of what Srila Prabhupada has given us, or what Srila Prabhupada has presented. And that, I think so, will happen the more we read and hear from Srila Prabhupada. Because what goes in, that's what comes out. So the more we read Srila Prabhupada's books, the more we hear from him, then that is what will come out, and we'll be able to present Srila Prabhupada as it is, in a very transparent, as a very transparent by medium. And so I think so the key is to regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books and hear from him, so that we present as he presented in his lectures, and then we can actually do great service to the Guru Parampara and to all the devotees and to all humanity.
Shravanam Kirtanam, that's it's a very simple but powerful point. It's anyone what we hear, then we can also speak. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, slowly we think we're coming to a natural end of the conversation, but still, we spoke about the different study aims, and one of them is also the Shastra Chakshu, to see the world through the eyes of scriptures. And usually that's one of the questions we end, in the sense of how to ensure that we apply this knowledge. Because when we read, when we spoke about sharpening the intelligence, we start to see the world through the eyes of scriptures. But what's the point to how to make sure that we apply what we have read? Any advice how that transformation actually takes place in our hearts and actions?
Right. Ultimately, I think so. We study, we read, we hear, so that we bring about a transformation within our lives. Because that's the reason why we have all come into this movement, to bring about a change, to bring about a transformation within our lives, and by that help others also bring about transformation in their lives. That is the entire purpose, to bring about, as Srila Prabhupada says sometimes, a revolution in consciousness. And so therefore, if we understand this goal, this purpose, then we will always be reading and hearing Srila Prabhupada with that aim and with that goal to bring about that transformation. So we'll be looking for those aspects as to how I can bring about a change within my own life. To give one example, just like in the society of devotees, one of the important aspects is to perceive devotees with the right perceptions, to view devotees with the right perceptions. And so therefore, we find the 6th verse of the Nectar of Instruction, where Rupa Goswami himself is speaking. Drishte swabhava janite bahushasya doshe na prakritatvam iha bhakta janasya pashed gangam vasamna kalubudbudafena panke brahma dhravatvam apagachti nir dharmai. So here Rupa Goswami is speaking of how one should not view a Vaishnava with material vision, should not see his vapudosha, his bodily defects, but rather one should see with spiritual vision, just like the Ganges water. And so therefore then we read this in the Shastra, and then we have to transport that into application. So after studying this verse from the Nectar of Instruction, then the next time we see a Vaishnava and we see some apparent faults in the Vaishnava, then we should be able to apply that within our life. So of course, that application may not come after one reading, but after repeated readings and study and hearing from other Vaishnavas and our own sincerity in trying to apply that within our own lives. I think so we'll be able to apply those teachings within our own life and thereby bring about that transformation. So that's just one example. Of course, the entire Shastra is ultimately meant for that purpose, to ultimately take those principles, to take those teachings, and the sincerity is to contemplate, mananam, as to how can I apply this within my own life? What are the probable challenges that I may have in that application? And seek help from other senior Vaishnavas in how to overcome those challenges in the application of Shastra. And I think so if we do that, and I think so that's the purpose of the study. As Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, Machitta Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayantas Chamam Nityam Tushanti Charamaticha. So that is what we're supposed to do in the association of devotees, to discuss and hear about Krishna Katha. And I think so if we do that, then Tushanti and Ramanti, we'll feel that great satisfaction, we'll experience spiritual happiness. And I think so by doing that, we'll be wonderful examples to attract others to do the same thing and also experience a great spiritual happiness within their own lives.
Wonderful. Listening to you for the last hour, I feel great spiritual satisfaction and happiness. So I think
that's your wonderful quality, your Vaishnava vision.
No, it's so wonderful to hear from you. And do you have any final message before we end? Something you'd like to share before we stop the interview?
The final message is what Srila Prabhupada wanted all of us to do, and that is read, read, read.
Thank you so much. Then we can end here. Thank you for giving your valuable time and inspiration to us. Srila Prabhupada Jai.
So personally, I'm extremely grateful to you and the Ministry of Education for giving me an opportunity to render this service and an opportunity to share my views on the reading Srila Prabhupada's books. So I'm extremely grateful and honored to have this opportunity to render the service. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Samved Gaur Bhakti.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,